Welcome, my friends. Imagine having a teacher whose ideas are still being used more than 2,000 years later. Can you believe that? Imagine going to school, studying science, learning about animals, or even asking questions about life, and discovering that one man helped shape many of those ideas centuries ago. That man was Aristotle. Today, we are going to travel back to ancient Greece and discover the incredible story of one of the wisest people who ever lived. And the best part is that, while listening to this story, you can improve your English in a fun and natural way. So, if you enjoy learning English through stories, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Now, let's go with the story. Let us travel back more than 2,300 years ago to ancient Greece. The world was completely different. There were no cars. No airplanes. No computers. No internet. People learned by talking to teachers, reading scrolls, and observing the world around them. During this time, a boy named Aristotle was born in 384 BC in a city called Stagira, in northern Greece. His father, Nicomachus, was a doctor who worked for the royal family. From a very young age, Aristotle was surrounded by knowledge. He watched his father study the human body and help sick people. This made him curious about how things worked. As a child, Aristotle loved asking questions. He wanted to understand everything. Why do animals behave differently? How do plants grow? Why do people make certain decisions? His mind was always active. Unlike many children, Aristotle enjoyed spending time observing nature. He paid attention to small details. He believed that every living thing could teach us something. Unfortunately, his childhood was not always easy. When Aristotle was still very young, both of his parents died. He became an orphan and was raised by another family member. Even though this was a difficult moment in his life, Aristotle never stopped learning. When he was 17 years old, he traveled to Athens, the most important city in Greece. Athens was known for its schools, teachers, and philosophers. People came from different places to study there. Aristotle joined a famous school called the Academy. This school had been created by one of the greatest philosophers in history. His name was Plato. Plato quickly noticed that Aristotle was an exceptional student. Aristotle loved learning. He spent many hours reading, writing, and discussing ideas with other students. Sometimes, he studied all day. He was very disciplined. People admired his intelligence. For 20 years, Aristotle remained at Plato's academy. 20 years. That is a very long time. During those years, he learned about mathematics, philosophy, science, politics, and many other subjects. But Aristotle was different from many students. He did not want to simply memorize information. He wanted to understand how the world truly worked. He believed that people should observe nature and ask questions before accepting ideas as facts. This way of thinking would later change education forever. As time passed, Aristotle became one of Plato's best students. However, they did not agree on everything. Plato believed that ideas were more important than what we see around us. Aristotle disagreed. He believed that observation was extremely important. He wanted people to study real life. He wanted them to investigate the world around them. Even though they had different opinions, Aristotle always respected his teacher. Years later, Plato died. Aristotle was now ready to begin his own journey. He would soon leave Athens and start a new chapter in his life. A chapter that would lead him to meet a young boy who would later become one of the most famous conquerors in history. His name was Alexander. And Aristotle would become his teacher. After many years of studying at Plato's academy, Aristotle was ready to begin a new chapter in his life. He had learned a lot. He had spent 20 years studying philosophy, science, mathematics, and many other subjects. Now, people started to recognize him as a wise man. Soon, an important opportunity arrived. King Philip II of Macedonia invited Aristotle to become the teacher of his young son. That boy was Alexander. Years later, the world would know him as Alexander the Great. At that time, Alexander was only 13 years old. He was intelligent, energetic, and very curious. Aristotle accepted the invitation. He wanted to teach Alexander not only how to become a leader, but also how to become a good person. Every day, Aristotle taught him many subjects. He taught him science. He taught him philosophy. He taught him geography. He taught him literature. But most importantly, he taught him how to think. Aristotle believed that asking questions was more important than simply memorizing information. He encouraged Alexander to be curious about the world. Their lessons were very different from modern classrooms. Sometimes they walked outside while talking. Sometimes they observed plants and animals. Sometimes they discussed big questions about life. Alexander admired his teacher very much. Some historians believe that Aristotle helped shape the way Alexander would later rule his empire. After several years, Aristotle decided to return to Athens. He was ready to create his own school. In 335 BC, he founded a school called the Lyceum. Very quickly, it became one of the most important schools in ancient Greece. Students came from many different places to learn from him. But Aristotle taught in a very unusual way. He did not spend all day sitting in one place. Instead, he often walked while teaching. His students walked with him and listened carefully. That is why some people called them the walking philosophers. Aristotle believed movement helped people think better. At the Lyceum, Aristotle studied almost everything. He studied animals. He studied plants. He studied the stars. He studied human behavior. He studied politics. He studied language. He studied ethics. Sometimes, it seemed like he wanted to understand the entire world. And in many ways, he tried to do exactly that. One thing made Aristotle different from many thinkers of his time. He did not want people to accept ideas without evidence. He wanted them to observe first. He wanted them to ask questions. He wanted them to investigate. He believed knowledge should come from studying the real world. For example, he spent many hours observing animals. He wrote detailed descriptions about them. He compared their bodies and behaviors. Today, scientists use much more advanced methods, but Aristotle was one of the first people to organize knowledge in a systematic way. His students wrote down many of his ideas. Little by little, his work grew. Soon, Aristotle had written about hundreds of different topics. People admired his discipline. He loved learning every single day. He once said that educating the mind without educating the heart was not education at all. For Aristotle, being intelligent was important. But being kind and honest was just as important. He believed happiness did not come from money or power. He believed happiness came from living a balanced life. He taught that people should avoid extremes. For example, he said that too much fear was not good. But having no fear at all was not good either. He believed people should find balance in everything. This idea became one of his most famous teachings. His school continued to grow. His students respected him. His ideas spread throughout Greece. Everything seemed to be going well. But soon, a huge event would change his life forever. The young boy he once taught had become one of the most powerful men in history. Alexander the Great had conquered many lands and created a massive empire. However, one day, shocking news arrived. Alexander the Great had died unexpectedly. And after his death, many things began to change for Aristotle. Some people started to criticize him because of his connection to Macedonia. His peaceful life in Athens was about to become much more difficult. And Aristotle would soon have to make one final decision that would mark the last chapter of his incredible life. After the death of Alexander the Great, everything changed for Aristotle. For many years, he had lived peacefully in Athens, teaching students and sharing his ideas. But now, people were becoming angry. Many citizens no longer trusted anyone connected to Macedonia. And because Aristotle had once been Alexander's teacher, some people started to criticize him. The situation became dangerous. Aristotle remembered something that had happened many years earlier. The famous philosopher Socrates had been sentenced to death in Athens. Aristotle did not want history to repeat itself. So, he made a difficult decision. He decided to leave the city. Before leaving, he reportedly said something very famous. He said that he would not allow Athens to commit a second crime against philosophy. In other words, he did not want another philosopher to be punished unfairly. Aristotle moved to a place called Chalcis, on the island of Euboea. There, he lived a much quieter life. He was already getting older. But even then, he never stopped thinking, reading, and writing. Learning had always been his passion. It was part of who he was. 1 year later, in 322 BC, Aristotle died at the age of 62. His life came to an end. But his ideas were only beginning their journey. Little by little, his books traveled to different countries. His students preserved many of his writings. Over time, his work reached Europe, the Middle East, and many other parts of the world. For hundreds of years, people continued studying his ideas. In fact, for almost 2,000 years, Aristotle was considered one of the greatest teachers in history. Many universities used his work. Scientists studied his observations. Philosophers discussed his ideas. Teachers shared his methods with their students. His influence was everywhere. Aristotle wrote about many subjects. He wrote about science, animals, ethics, politics, language, logic, and even happiness. Imagine that. One person trying to understand almost every part of human life. That was Aristotle. One of his most important lessons was very simple. He believed people should never stop asking questions. He thought curiosity was one of the most powerful tools a person could have. He also believed that learning is a lifelong process. Learning is not only for young people. We should learn throughout our entire lives. Aristotle believed that habits are very important. He once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." The small actions we do every day slowly shape who we become. If we practice kindness, we become kind people. If we practice discipline, we become disciplined people. Aristotle also believed that happiness cannot be bought with money or power. He believed true happiness comes from living a balanced life, helping others, being honest, learning new things, and becoming the best version of yourself. Even today, more than 2,300 years later, his ideas are still studied in schools and universities around the world. This is why Aristotle is one of the most important philosophers in history. His story reminds us that asking questions is never a waste of time. Sometimes, one simple question can change everything. Thank you for listening. Keep learning, keep growing, and never stop asking questions. See you in the next story.